Last time on Guns and Glitter, Grace had trouble finding a place to stay after her family kicked her out of their home. Welcome to CC Writes. My name is CC Lepki, and today is part 9 of my story, Guns and Glitter. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification button so you'll know when the next episode comes out. White light blasted in Grace's eyes. She jumped and scrambled back away from the light, knocking her head against glass. Heart thundering in her ears, she looked around in panicked confusion. This wasn't her home. It wasn't her room. 2 strangers in police uniforms stood over her, their faces shrouded in shadow. Several terrified seconds later, Grace remembered where she was. "You're gonna need to move along, ma'am." The taller of the 2 police officers was a man. His voice was a calm baritone. "I don't know where else to go." Grace gathered the small nest of clothes that she'd arranged to make her sleeping spot more comfortable. She struggled to get the zipper of her duffel bag closed, then shifted from foot to foot as she tried to decide what to do. "Did you try the shelter?" The second officer was a young woman. Her voice was hard and derisive. "They don't accept women." "Do you have anyone you can stay with?" The woman seemed irritated, like Grace's lack of options was somehow her own fault. "Do you really think I would be sleeping on the street if I had someplace else to go?" The woman sneered. "No reason to get catty." The duffel bag felt 10 times heavier than it did earlier that day. Grace sighed and shifted it to the other shoulder. "Whatever. I'll just find somewhere else to sleep. Sorry my homelessness is such an inconvenience to you." Her stomach growled loudly. Grace closed her eyes and waited for the hunger protest to subside before she slowly staggered away. The female officer walked down the steps and to the street where the police car sat, but the man trotted after Grace. He put away the flashlight they shined in her face to wake her up. Without it, the streetlights cast enough of a glow that she could see he was a lightly tanned man with a strong jaw and a button nose that made his face look cute as opposed to handsome. "Here, take this and try to get a hotel or something for the night." He took her hand and placed a small wad of 20s in her palm. "The streets are dangerous at night." "They're dangerous during the day, too." She closed the fist around the money. "Thank you." "Franklin, stop flirting. We got a domestic dispute call on the radio." The female officer stood halfway out of the police cruiser with a radio pressed close to her face as she spoke quickly. "Hurry it up!" Officer Franklin rolled his eyes. "Coming!" He trotted back to the car with one last glance in Grace's direction. Grace watched the cruiser pull away with lights blaring, then looked down at the wad of cash in her fist. It would cover one night at a hotel, or she could use it to buy food that would last her a couple of weeks. How do people choose? In the end, she decided to save the money. It would take 2 months' worth of rent to even get her into a crummy apartment on the outskirts of Esperanza. Even with all the money she made at work, it would be difficult to save that up and still pay for Papa's hospital bills and the mortgage on the house. Besides, even if she got groceries, she had no place to store it. With a put-upon sigh, she hefted her duffel bag over one shoulder and walked groggily toward the Fox Den. If nothing else, she could sleep in the alleyway next to the club and take a shower in the locker room before work. When the club came into view, Grace was so tired she fell to the ground 2 blocks away. She crawled the rest of the way, and collapsed on a stack of trash in the alley next to the dumpster. Not even the smell of rotting food was able to keep her conscious. Grace slept, curled up with her duffel bag against her stomach. "Kit? Is that you?" The whisper was low and worried. Grace opened her eyes and tried to wipe away the solid crust of eye goop that fused her eyelashes together. She glared up at the midday sun that burned in a cloudless sky. "Oh, thank God. I thought you were dead." The man placed a hand on his heart and leaned heavily against the dumpster. "Why on earth are you sleeping in the trash?" He was one of Grace's regulars, a man named Carter. He looked like a blue-collar guy, but he tipped like one of her rich clients. The gruff way he carried himself and a mix of prison tattoos across his arms and shoulders made her think he was some kind of mobster. "I'm having a rough time." She brushed her hair out of her face and looked away from him. Carter shook his head and bent to one knee, shifting his bulk so he could sit on the ground next to her. "What's going on, sweetheart?" "My family found out I've been working here. I got kicked out." He whistled softly. "I can't say I don't understand. I'd be a wreck if I found out my daughter was doing something like this." He waved his hand generally toward the club. "You don't have any savings? What happened to all those nice tips you talked me out of every night?" His crooked smile was sweet. Grace smiled back sadly. "My dad is sick. I was paying his and Mom's bills. Their mortgage was 3 months overdue before I got this job. Now they're paid ahead." Carter wiped his mouth. "Goodness, Kit, you're gonna make me fall for you. You know I got a wife." He laughed. Grace hugged her duffel bag silently as he watched. "I take it you're not going to stop taking care of them?" Grace shook her head. Eyes raised to the sky in thought, Carter shifted. "I can't bring you home with me. Doubt you'd even want to shack up with an old man like me." Grace grinned. "No offense." "None taken. You're a smart girl, I get it." He laughed quietly. "You're not going to stop taking care of your family either." "You know me so well." "True love, sweetheart, true love." His fingers rubbed restlessly on the knee of his jeans. "So what will you do? You plan to sleep on the streets forever?" She shrugged. "If I have to." The smell from the trash was starting to get to her. Grace stood and brushed herself off. Carter made as if to stand with her, but almost fell over. She helped him to his feet with a great deal of fumbling and laughter. Carter patted down his jeans and blushed with a boyish grin. "The streets are dangerous. You need to be able to protect yourself." He eyed her with a sideways glance, and she looked down at her hands. "I think you know that already." Carter shook his head and reached into his jacket. From a hidden holster, he pulled out a very small pistol, not much bigger than Grace's hands. "Take this, sweetheart. Be careful, it's loaded." Grace stared at the small gun in wonder. She'd never held one before. She didn't even know what to do with one. "Carter, I can't take this. I don't know how to use it." "It's easy enough. Don't point it at other people unless you mean it. Always keep your finger off the trigger unless you plan to shoot." He pointed to a small button above the trigger. "That's the safety. Press it before you pull the trigger or it won't shoot." He pressed another, larger button next to the safety, and the butt of the handle fell out. "This is the magazine release. That's where the bullets get loaded in." He popped the magazine back into the gun and slid the top back to release a bullet from the chamber. "Do that if it ever gets stuck." He handed her the bullet. "And you see those dots on the front? Line them up on the thing you want to shoot. It's basically point and click." Grace lifted the gun and pointed it at the wall. "Like this?" Carter laughed. Here, let me show you. He spent about 20 minutes helping her get used to how she was supposed to hold the gun. It was a lot different from what she usually saw in the movies. He warned her about recoil and gave her tips on how to keep the gun steady as she fired. The goal is to scare people away, not to actually have to use it, he shrugged. But you look a lot scarier if it seems like you know what you're doing. Grace nodded, then slipped the gun securely into her duffel bag. Thanks, Carter. He ruffled her hair. Anytime, sweetheart. You on call tonight? Yeah. Then I'll see you in a bit. He winked. See you. Her hands traced the shape of the gun inside of her bag. Carter left with a wave as she chewed her lip. The gun was probably worth a couple $100 at least. Carter probably wouldn't mind if she pawned it, if it meant getting off the streets faster. Grace couldn't see herself actually using the gun, even if it turned out she needed it. Either way, she could make use of it. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Guns and Glitter. I hope you like the story so far. If this is your first time watching and you like what you heard, then make sure to go back and check out the story from the beginning. I'll post the link in the description. This is a continuing story, and I plan to share the entire thing with you on a weekly basis until the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification button so you'll know when the next episode comes out. Till next time, see you later.